What if a billionaire single father, chasing a business deal, took the wrong highway accidentally to walk into a dusty roadside cafe where the waitress looked at him like he was a ghost from her past? What if her first words weren't, "Can I take your order? But I've been waiting since 2012. Julian Hart stepped out of his luxury rental car into the soft drizzle, annoyed. His GPS had rerouted him after a traffic accident blocked the main road into Atlanta. With a business pitch in 3 hours and no coffee in his system, his temper simmered just below the surface. He spotted the old roadside diner, Pinahue Griddle, a neon sign flickering above the door. It was the kind of place he hadn't stepped into since college, but it was open and warm. Inside, the air smelled like cinnamon rolls and old stories. The wooden booths were chipped, the vinyl stools faded, but the space carried a strange kind of charm. A waitress passed behind the counter, early 30s, brunette, hair in a loose bun, a smudge of flour on her apron. She turned toward him, then froze, her face drained of color. Her lips parted, and before he could speak, she said something that made Julian's heart stutter. "You made it. Finally, I've waited since 2012. Julian blinked. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" The woman didn't smile. She reached into her apron, pulled out a crumpled paper napkin, and gently placed it on the counter between them, in faded ink. It read, "Meet me here again one day, July 12th, no matter what. Love, Jules." Julian Hart wasn't always a billionaire. In 2012, he was a broke engineering student at Georgia Tech, waiting tables at Pine Hill Griddle to afford rent and ramen. That summer, everything changed when he met Ellie Monroe, a literature student from Savannah working the morning shift. They were opposites. He was a math mind, she, a poet. He was always late, she always early. But something clicked. That July, they were inseparable. Pancake picnics, late-night dreams, scribbled poems left in sugar shakers. The diner was their sanctuary. On their last shift together, Julian got the call. A tech startup in California had offered him a spot. He left that night, after leaving Ellie a napkin note. "One day, I'll be back. July 12th. Wait for me." But he never came. Julian's startup exploded faster than he imagined. A car accident, no phone signal, days in recovery. By the time he remembered what day it was, weeks had passed. He felt ashamed. So much time had gone by, he assumed she'd moved on. He never wrote, never called. He buried that summer, like a regret, sealed in a box. Ellie waited every year on July 12th, taking the shift at Pine Hill Griddle, folding that same napkin into her apron. She raised a child alone, her son Noah, now 12, who loved puzzles and fixing things, just like his father. She told Noah his dad was a good man, just lost. Julian looked at Ellie, then at the napkin, his fingers trembling. "Ellie, ... How long have you had this?" She met his eyes. 13 years, and now you're here, but not by choice, right? Julian swallowed hard. Before he could answer, a boy's voice rang from the back of the kitchen. "Mom, the griddle's jammed again, should I use the wrench?" Julian turned, and froze. The boy in the kitchen had his eyes. The boy's voice echoed through the small cafe like a thread pulling time backward. Julian's breath caught in his throat as he watched the figure of a young boy appear from behind the swinging kitchen door, wiping his hands on a tubig apron, a streak of flour across his cheek. The world around Julian seemed to narrow, sounds muted, vision focused only on the child's face, those familiar sea-glass green eyes, the unruly chestnut curls, and that exact same crooked little smile he saw in the mirror every morning. The boy looked at Julian, paused, and tilted his head with quiet curiosity. "Hi," he said. "You're new, you're lost or something." Julian forced a blink, a breath, anything to ground himself. "Ah, I guess I am," he managed. His voice felt smaller than he remembered it being. The waitress Sally walked slowly around the counter, almost cautiously, as if afraid the moment might shatter if she moved too fast. "Noah," she said gently, "go check the storeroom for a fresh bag of pancake mix. I'll fix the griddle in a minute." The boy nodded and disappeared through the back, humming a tune under his breath, completely unaware of the storm he had just stepped into. Julian leaned against the counter like he needed it to stand. "He's mine, isn't he?" Ellie said. Nothing. Her eyes didn't waver. She simply reached over, took a coffee mug from the stack, and began to pour. "That depends," she said. "Are you the same man who left a promise on a napkin and never looked back?" Julian winced. I wanted to come back. Life always gets in the way, she interrupted softly. But the people who matter, they find a way through it. He sat down slowly, placing both palms flat on the counter, as if trying to steady a past that had just roared back into the present. I thought you would have moved on, married, happy. Ellie's laugh was quiet, almost tired. Moved on, sure, married, never happy. She gave a half smile. Happiness became something smaller, not the grand kind, the everyday kind. Coffee in the morning, my son's laugh, the quiet parts of life. Julian stared at the steam rising from his mug, his fingers wrapped around the ceramic, grateful for the warmth, even as a chill settled deeper inside him. I never stopped thinking about you, he said. Ellie raised an eyebrow. That's funny, you sure looked like you stopped. He couldn't argue. 13 years of silence were hard to justify. He had built an empire. Yes, Heart Technologies was now a name on billboards and in boardrooms across the country. But not once in that glass and steel world had he ever felt more than a whisper of the connection he had known in this tiny roadside diner. One summer, when the world felt like a song, Ellie wiped her hands on a cloth and took a seat across from him. She studied him the way someone studies an old photograph, familiar but faded. Why are you really here, Julian? He looked up. I got rerouted. GPS glitch. Just needed coffee. I didn't even know this place still existed. She nodded, slowly. And now? Julian hesitated, then whispered, now I don't want to leave. For a moment, there was silence between them. Not the awkward kind, just the kind full of words that hadn't yet found their shape. From the back, Noah shouted, Mum, the light in the storeroom's flickering again. Want me to climb up and fix it? Ellie sighed, called back, no, just wait, I'll do it. She turned to Julian, smiling faintly. He's got your need to fix things. Everything. Even the broken lights. Julian's heart twisted at that. Then something inside him shifted. Let me help. Ellie gave him a look. You, in a diner kitchen. I wasn't always in a suit, he said. You forget he used to work the line. Her eyes softened, memories flickering behind them. You burned toast 5 times in one day. Julian grinned. Yeah, but I made the best hash browns you ever had. A ghost of a laugh escaped her lips before she caught herself. Fine. You want to help? The griddles busted. Let's see if your billionaire brain remembers grease traps. The moment they stepped into the kitchen together, it was like opening a book they'd both once loved and never finished. Julian rolled up his sleeves, inspecting the griddle while Ellie handed him tools. Their movements began to align without effort, like old rhythms resurfacing from some forgotten part of the soul. Noah watched quietly from the corner, his eyes darting between them. Mum, he whispered, when Ellie walked past. Is he... Someone. Ellie crouched down to his height. He's someone who meant a lot to me a long time ago. Noah blinked, like a lost page in a book. She paused, then nodded. Exactly like that. Later that afternoon, the cafe slowly emptied. Rain drizzled outside. Julian stayed longer than he meant to. Hours passed without notice. He learned Noah liked to build gadgets from old junk and dreamed of becoming an inventor. They played a game of riddles and laughed when Julian got every one wrong. As the sun began to dip behind grey clouds, Julian stood to leave. Ellie walked him to the door. You're heading back to Atlanta? He looked back at her and Noah, framed by the kitchen lights. His throat tightened. I don't know, he said honestly. I thought I was. She nodded, her voice quieter now. He's never had a father, Julian, but he's had enough heartbreak. Don't show up just to disappear again. He nodded. I won't. As he stepped outside, the wind picked up, rustling the sign above the cafe. He turned back one last time. What are you doing on Saturday? Ellie raised an eyebrow. Why? Because I was thinking. He smiled gently. I'd like to order some hash browns and start making up for 13 years. She didn't answer, but her eyes said enough. That he got in his car. GPS rerouted again. Julian ignored it. For the first time in years, he was finally where he was supposed to be. The next morning, Pine Hill Griddle buzzed with its usual calm hum, coffee brewing, bacon sizzling, and the faint hum of a country song on the old jukebox near the window. But inside Julian Hart's chest, there was no calm. He sat in a corner booth, alone, eyes fixed on a worn menu he wasn't reading, thoughts looping like a song stuck on a single lyric. Ellie hadn't said yes, but she hadn't said no either. and that alone was more hope than he thought he deserved. Hadn't slept much. All night he kept seeing Noah's face, his eyes, his curiosity. The way he leaned forward when he talked about inventions and future plans, like every idea he had might change the world. Julian recognized that spark. He once had it too, before boardrooms and deadlines dulled his light. Julian stirred his coffee slowly. It tasted different than he remembered, less bitter, more grounded. Or maybe he was just tasting life for real for the first time in years. Then the bell over the front door jingled. Noah walked in, his backpack bouncing with each step, a pencil tucked behind one ear, and a spiral notebook clutched in his hand. He scanned the room, spotted Julian, and walked straight over like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Hey," Noah said, sliding into the booth across from him. "You said you'd be back today." Julian smiled. "I did, didn't I?" Noah pulled the notebook open, flipping past pages of his gadgets, circuit ideas, even a strange-looking toaster that could apparently flip pancakes. "So, if you're gonna hang around, maybe you could help me build something." Julian blinked. "You want me to help you invent?" "Why not?" Noah shrugged. "You said you used to build stuff, and Mum said you were smart." That made Julian pause. "She did." "Yeah," Noah said. "She also said you left." The words were quiet, not accusing, just true. Julian sat back, heart tight. "She's right. I did." "Why?" the boy asked. There it was, the question he'd been running from since the moment he stepped out of his car yesterday. Julian looked at Noah, really looked at him, the way his fingers tapped the table when he was thinking, the way his left eyebrow lifted slightly in curiosity. Details that meant something now. "Because I didn't know you existed," Julian said. "And when I found out, it was already too late. Or at least, I thought it was." Noah stared at him, then glanced back at the notebook. "Do you wish you knew sooner?" he asked. Julian didn't hesitate. More than anything, a long silence passed between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind that stitched something invisible between two people, recognition, perhaps, or the fragile beginning of trust. "Okay," Noah finally said, closing the notebook. "Let's build something together. But it's gotta be cool, not boring, like corporate smart." Julian laughed. "Deal." Behind the counter, Ellie watched from a distance. She'd told herself she'd keep a safe space between Julian and her son, to protect him from disappointment. But something about the way they were now, heads bent together, sketching blueprints on napkins, Noah already correcting Julian's math, it was hard to ignore or deny. Hours passed. Lunch rush came and went. Julian stayed, helping with orders, even washing dishes. When Ellie joked, he was on trial, and he didn't complain once. In the lull of the afternoon, Ellie finally sat beside him again, her hands wrapped around a fresh cup of tea. "You know this can't be just a weekend visit," she said softly. Julian nodded. "I know, that's why I cancelled my flight." Ellie blinked. "You what?" He met her eyes. "I called my assistant this morning, told her to reschedule everything indefinitely." "Julian," her voice faltered. "That's not, this isn't. I'm not trying to pressure you, Ellie, or fix the past. I just want to start something here. With you, with him, even if it's just being nearby." He pulled out a folded piece of paper from his coat. "I rented a place down the road, month to month. Just a small house near the lake. Nothing fancy." She looked at the paper, then at him. "You really changed," she said. "I didn't mean to," Julian answered. "I just got lost." She didn't respond right away, but she didn't walk away either. The next day, Julian picked Noah up from school. They stopped at a hardware store for parts. That night, they built a small motor together that powered a spinning spoon machine. Completely unnecessary, totally brilliant. And when it worked, Noah laughed, this deep, belly laugh that Julian didn't even realize he'd been waiting to hear. It was like finding a sound he didn't know was missing from his life. Days turned into a week. On the 7th night, Julian and Ellie stood outside the cafe after closing. The stars above were scattered across the sky like secrets waiting to be told. He turned to her, his voice low. "I was afraid," he said, "of messing up, of coming back and realizing I didn't belong in your world anymore." Ellie looked up at him, her face lit softly by the glow of the diner lights. "And now," he smiled gently, "now I'm more afraid of leaving." She didn't answer with words. Instead, she reached into her apron and handed him the old napkin, faded, edges worn, but still carrying the ink of a promise made so long ago. Julian stared at it, then at her. Maybe, Ellie whispered, we're not supposed to pick up where we left off. Maybe we're just supposed to start from here. He nodded. From here sounds perfect. From the window, Noah watched them, the napkin between them like a bridge finally rebuilt. He didn't understand all of it yet, but he knew one thing. Sometimes, even lost pages find their place in the story again. The soft knock came just after 6 a.m., long before the sun had climbed over the pines behind the little lake house. Julian opened the front door in his hoodie and socks, blinking into the fog of the early morning that was Noah, hair sticking out in every direction, pajama pants tucked into untied sneakers, and cradling a cereal box under one arm like it was a sacred artifact. You said Saturday mornings were for invention breakfasts, he said, stepping past Julian into the house without waiting for an answer. Julian blinked, then smiled as Noah plopped onto the living room rug and started spreading out blueprints and plastic gears. The kid had no hesitation, no doubts, just the certainty that this was exactly where he belonged. Julian stood in the doorway a moment longer, taking it in, the boy, the project, the way the rising sun painted the walls in gold. It was the first morning in years that didn't start with meetings or market reports, just a child's laugh and the hum of possibility. But good things, he'd learned, rarely came without shadows. By mid-morning, Ellie arrived surprised to find Noah had left without a word, but even more surprised at what she found when she walked in. Julian on the floor, helping Noah connect wires to a tiny motor. The kitchen smelled like burnt toast and banana pancakes. Noah turned to her. Mom, you have to see this. It's gonna make the toaster launch toast when it's ready. Julian shot her a look of mock warning. We're in phase 1 of testing. I told him we should probably get a fire extinguisher first. Ellie smirked, arms folded. And this is what I get for trusting you with my son. Julian stood, brushing flour off his shirt. Hey, we've had 0 electrical fires. That's a success. Ellie walked toward them and crouched beside the half-built contraption, her hand brushing Julian's accidentally. Their eyes met for just a second. That spark, it hadn't gone anywhere. It had just waited, like a book paused mid-sentence. But as quickly as the moment came, it shifted. Julian's phone buzzed on the table. He ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Ellie raised an eyebrow. Someone's persistent. Julian walked over, saw the caller ID, Hart HQ. He answered with a sigh. Julian Hart. The voice on the other end was crisp, urgent. Mr. Hart, I know you said you're off-grid, but something's come up. The investors are panicking. There's a buyout rumor. We need you in the city today. Julian froze. Noah looked up from the floor. Is everything okay? Julian turned, plastering on a smile. Yeah, buddy, just grown-up stuff. Ellie studied him. She could tell the smile wasn't real. She always could. That night, after dinner, Julian sat on the back porch with Ellie, while Noah slept inside. Crickets chirped. The moon hung low, swollen with memory. I have to go back tomorrow, Julian said quietly. Ellie nodded slowly, staring out over the water. I figured. He turned to her. But I'll be back. She looked at him, tired but not bitter. You said that once before. I mean it this time. You meant it then too. That one landed. Julian leaned forward. I'm not the same guy, Ellie. I don't want to vanish again. I want to build something with you, with him. And what happens when the next crisis hits? Another boardroom fire. Another billion-dollar emergency. I'll bring the extinguisher, he said, trying to lighten the mood. She didn't laugh. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled something out, a worn photograph. It was of her and Julian, years ago, the summer of 2012, sun-drenched, full of dreams. Her face was younger, eyes filled with hope, his arm wrapped around her like she was the only thing that mattered. You gave me this at the end of that summer, she whispered, told me to keep it close. He reached out, touched the corner of the photo. I didn't know you still had it. I did, she said, but I'm not the girl in that picture anymore. And you're not the boy. Julian sat back. Then maybe we should stop chasing what we were and figure out who we are now. Ellie looked at him for a long moment. Then, almost reluctantly, she nodded. I don't need promises, Julian. Not this time. I just need you to show up. That's it. He swallowed hard. I will. The next morning, he left before sunrise, left behind pancakes, blueprints, and a sleeping boy who didn't stir when he whispered goodbye. But before pulling out of the driveway, Julian placed a small box on the porch. Inside was a handwritten note. Back soon. Not to visit this time, to stay. Tucked beneath, it was something else, Noah's latest invention, rebuilt with Julian's help. A tiny toaster that did launch toast. A little ridiculous, but it worked, kind of. And for now, maybe that was enough. Because sometimes, returning isn't about fixing everything, it's about proving day by day that you're not gone. Julian had never felt so far from the life he wanted to build as he did standing in that glass-walled boardroom on the 27th floor of Hart Industries. The skyline stretched out behind him like a glittering cage. It was everything he'd once worked for: prestige, power, and the silent awe that followed him wherever he walked. But now, it all felt like a place he no longer belonged. Not after mornings filled with burnt pancakes and invention breakfasts. Not after Noah's laugh, or Ellie's eyes when she finally let her guard down. The CEO chair at the head of the table felt colder than ever. Julian, his assistant, whispered urgently, "The board's waiting." He nodded and stepped inside. The room buzzed with controlled panic. Legal advisors, shareholders, division heads, all talking over each other about falling stocks and rumors of Julian's disappearance. Some were supportive, some not. One woman, with silver hair and a sharp jawline, leaned forward. "Mr. Hart, with all due respect, the company needs leadership. We need you here." He opened his mouth, but someone else interrupted. "Where have you been, Julian? Off the grid. You missed 2 key meetings. Our investors are starting to think this company is rudderless." He almost said it. Almost said, "I found my son. I found the only version of myself that makes sense." But they wouldn't understand. They weren't built to. Instead, he straightened his back and said, "I needed time to think. Time to reset." A murmur ran through the room. "Reset." The silver-haired woman repeated. "You're not a meditation coach, Julian. You're the face of a billion-dollar empire." "I'm also a father," he said quietly. That silenced the room. Some looked surprised. Others looked like they were just now remembering. One man near the end of the table chuckled softly, as if amused. "Julian, are you planning to take a sabbatical now? Teach robotics at a middle school?" "I'm not leaving the company," Julian said, "but I am changing how I lead it." More murmurs. Raised eyebrows. One legal advisor furiously scribbled notes. "I built Hart Industries to create solutions," he continued. "But somewhere along the way, I stopped solving anything real that changes today. If we're building the future, let's do it with purpose. Let's put our money into education, tech, sustainability, invention grants for kids' real impact." Someone whispered, "Is he serious?" "Yes," Julian said, eyes scanning the room. "Starting with a new community fund. I'm putting up the first 10 million personally." There were gasps, confusion, awe, but underneath all of it something new. Respect, not the cold kind, the earned kind. After the meeting, his assistant caught up with him in the elevator. "You were amazing in there," she said, "but are you sure you're not going to regret pulling back?" Julian looked at his reflection in the elevator's polished walls. For the first time in years, he saw someone real. "I'm already late for breakfast with my son," he replied. "That's the only thing I'd regret missing." Back in Pine Hill, Ellie moved through the cafe with her usual ease, but something was different. Every time the door opened, she looked up instinctively. Every ring of the bell made her heart stutter. She wouldn't admit it, not to herself, not to anyone, but she missed him. Noah, meanwhile, had started tinkering with a new project, a mechanical bell that would ring differently when Julian walked through the door. "So we know it's him before we even look," he'd said. Ellie had smiled, but part of her worried. What if Julian didn't come back? And then, 2 days later, the bell rang, but it didn't sound like the regular ding. It was higher, clearer. Noah's invention had worked. He raced from the kitchen, and there, in the doorway, stood Julian, tired, unshaven, suitcase in hand, but smiling. "I told you I'd be back," he said. Noah ran to him without hesitation. "Did they fire you?" Julian laughed. "Not yet. But they did let me start something new." He handed Noah a folder. Inside were blueprints, real ones, patent-pending ideas, and grant proposals for youth inventors, ones Noah had inspired. Ellie watched them from behind the counter, her heart full and cautious all at once. When she finally walked over, Julian stood and handed her something small, a key to the house by the lake. He said, "Just in case you ever want to open the door without knocking." She stared at the key, then at him. "You're staying?" "I don't want to be anywhere else." That night, the three of them sat under a string of old cafe lights. Julian had helped Noah hang. Toast popped from the invention, toasters slightly burnt. but it flew across the room with flair. Noah cheered. Julian caught it mid-air. Ellie laughed for the first time in a long time without holding back, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Not a promise, not a plan, but something sturdier. Presence. Consistency. A beginning. Because sometimes life doesn't give you a second chance. It gives you a new chapter, and this time, they were writing it together. The air was cooler than usual for late summer. Crickets hummed a steady rhythm outside the lake house, and inside, the smell of cinnamon rolls drifted from the kitchen. Noah, with his signature messy curls, was carefully frosting them, his tongue poking from the corner of his mouth as he concentrated. Julian stood nearby, still in pajama pants and a hoodie, his phone face down on the counter. That alone was a sign of something deeper. He wasn't waiting for a call, an email, a crisis. He was present. But even in quiet, beautiful mornings like this, change knocks gently before it barges in. Across town, Ellie stood in her old bedroom at her parents' house, a small suitcase open on the bed. Inside were things she hadn't touched in over a decade: a worn copy of Little Women, a dusty typewriter ribbon, and a red scarf Julian had given her the summer of 2012. She hadn't planned on packing it, but her hands found it anyway. She wasn't leaving town, not really. But something inside her needed time to breathe on its own, not to escape Julian, not to doubt him, just to remember who she was. When Julian arrived later that afternoon, Noah was out at a school club, and Ellie stood on the porch waiting, suitcase at her feet. His heart dipped. Just for a second. "I'm not running," she said softly, before he could even ask. "I just need a few days to remember who I am, outside of being a mum, outside of being the girl who waited." Julian nodded slowly, stepping closer. "I get that, and I'll be here when you get back. No promises." "No promises," he smiled, "just presence." She reached into her bag and pulled out the old napkin, the one from 2012, folded. So many times it was nearly falling apart. "You kept your part of the promise," she said. "Now let me keep mine." And she was gone. Not forever, just for a breath. The next few days moved slowly. Julian and Noah built a solar-powered model boat, painted the porch swing, and made dinner every night from a cookbook titled Recipes for the Soul. Julian even burned the lasagna once and didn't curse out loud, which Noah said was a new personal record. But it was in the quiet moments, watching cartoons curled up on the couch or reading together under a blanket fort, that Julian realized something deeper than fatherhood had taken root. He belonged, not because he'd earned it, but because he'd chosen it. Again and again. On the fifth evening, the sun dipped low and gold across the lake, and Julian sat on the dock with his feet in the water. He hadn't opened his email in days, hadn't checked stock prices or venture news. His life, once packed with noise, now felt full in silence. And then, footsteps. Ellie. No suitcase, no fanfare, just her and a small smile that said more than words could. "I remembered something," she said, sitting beside him. He looked over. "Yeah, the night we said goodbye in 2012, I told myself if I ever saw you again, I wouldn't make it easy." He chuckled. "You didn't." She turned, eyes soft but steady. "But you made it worth it." He reached for her hand. It felt right, not like a fairy tale, not like a movie, just real. Later that night, the three of them sat on the back porch. Julian grilled marshmallows. Noah told a wild story about a robot dog that could do backflips. And Ellie laughed until tears rolled down her cheeks. They weren't perfect. There were still things to work through, pasts to forgive, futures to plan. But for now, they were a family, a real one. And as fireflies danced across the yard and the moon rose silver over the trees, Julian looked at the two people who had changed everything. He once believed success was measured in dollars, deals, deadlines. Now he knew better. Success was showing up when it mattered most. It was cinnamon rolls on a Saturday morning, a folded napkin that held a promise, a small invention that made toast fly across a room, and two people, one small, one strong, who had waited, not because they were stuck, but because they believed he might still come home. Sometimes life doesn't need a grand finale. Sometimes the soft return is more powerful than any triumphant arrival. And in that quiet night, filled with laughter and stars, Julian finally understood. He hadn't stumbled into the wrong place that day. He had finally found where he was meant to be.